Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali and today I wish to talk about neglect and its long-term effects. Now before we dive into that, let's take a look at this clip. Over here we notice that the baby bear had been playful and relaxed till it faces threat, rather real danger. And it begins to run to try and escape its predator. Now that's the baby bear who can try and run and escape from the unfortunate circumstance. Human babies unfortunately cannot run or do anything for the longest time amongst the mammalian species, or for that matter any other species. So when the human child is neglected, its nervous system goes under a lot of distress, which is why it cries out to be relieved. But imagine if most days the baby and later the child does not get that relief, is not soothed. Its natural coping mechanism after a while would be to learn to shut itself down, to not express itself. For it gets the message that nobody hears it when it needs to be heard. Or on the other hand, the child or the growing infant might start acting out as well, being dramatic, an attention seeker, or some might even call the child a very demanding or a difficult child. For through the eyes of the child, he or she learns that it's the only way they get attention, that he or she gets heard, and maybe it's their only chance of being seen and being understood. The child in his or her own way gets the message that no one cares because they are unworthy of being cared for. They are unworthy of love and affection and belonging. and thereby they might even feel lost. For if you look at that clip again, the child, and more so a human child who takes longer to take care of itself, does not and cannot understand that his or her parents are neglectful, that they might be just too busy, that their hands might be too full or be preoccupied with their lives. But rather the child gets the message that he or she is unworthy and probably even a burden and an unwanted responsibility. And since that is the message that the child interprets, he or she acts out in unwanted and undesirable ways, or at times will swing in completely the opposite direction, wherein they'll try and become a rather over-responsible person, not just a responsible one, but an over-responsible one, who unfortunately will also have difficulty trusting others, for it could not do so when it wanted to rely on others when they were growing up, when they could not do it on their own and were in a very vulnerable place. Being vulnerable to these people might feel very threatening. Now, since some of them would try to be over-responsible, they will go out of their way to prove to others that he or she is worthy of affection, love, care, and belonging. For if they are over-responsible, they can shoulder the responsibility of not only themselves, but 10 other people at the same time. They might even have difficulty asking for help, for when they wanted help while they were growing up, it wasn't received. The children, or rather the growing up individual who had experienced neglect, can grow into identifying themselves as either being too needy, perceived as being too clingy by others, or as being very independent, rather than creating a space for interdependency, wherein not only they can address their needs and wants, but can even hear the needs and wants of others. A few might also turn into overachievers, since they can land themselves into the spectrum of being over-responsible. They naturally, unconsciously will gravitate towards people, even as they grow up into adults, who somewhat like their parents are not as responsible as themselves, or at least that's what they think. Or later in life, they will gravitate towards those who think that they will enact their parents' role and fill in the role that had been left unfulfilled by their parents. And invariably in both of these equations, it will create a very codependent dynamic, creating relationships that feel unfulfilling. Many a times people might continue to stay in relationships longer than desired, despite feeling frustrated and resentful, not only towards their partners, but also towards themselves. For their unconscious driving mechanism, which is of an over-responsible person, an overgiver, an overachiever, is getting satisfied on some level. They are the person who's completely dependent on them. And on the other hand, some others might even engage in relationships which are distant, almost avoidant, for that was how they experienced their version of love and care in the formative years of their life. For our subconscious does not know the art of discernment, and it looks for something that feels familiar. And as Jittu Krishnamurti had said, man is not as much afraid of the unfamiliar as he is afraid of the known coming to an end. And in my understanding, he was referring to the bigger chunk that lays hidden beneath our conscious awareness. The individuals, the children who have grown up being neglected, can also grow up as perfectionists, for they very early learn that they will be appreciated and accepted and loved if they just become perfect. And as Brené Brown puts it, perfectionism is a self-destructive and an addictive belief system that fuels the thought, if I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid the pain of shame, judgment, and blame. For who cannot accept anything that's perfect? Which invariably also makes them quite self-critical and hard on themselves. These are also the people who find it difficult to let go of things. And since our lives are not just personal but also interpersonal, since we share our lives with others, It's an interactive belief system. And since the person with this belief system is also interacting with others, it in no way can be a one-way street. It equally impacts the lives of those whom we share it with. Many a time, individuals or children who have grown up with neglect during their formative years, essentially the first 5 to 7 years of our lives, can develop tendencies to invalidate our own feelings and thereby also the feeling of others. We can end up overly rationalizing our experiences or even invalidating them as well, not only in ourselves but in others as well. People who grew up to be neglected for most parts will either behave in overtly rebellious ways or would become people pleasers who would want to fit in any group or situation to have that sense of belonging which they did not receive when they were growing up. They might have difficulty experiencing and voicing their own opinions, preferences, voices, and would even tend to agree with almost everything. They find it difficult to come to any decision and make choices for themselves that can go against the willingness of others. They quite likely would also face challenges establishing healthy boundaries and negotiating their negotiables and non-negotiables. They might not want to rock the boat, so to speak, even when it's necessary and may be a required thing to do. For maintaining the status quo to them, even when undesirable, consciously and unconsciously might be the only way to live and exist. And invariably how others perceive them might be their driving default in all of their decisions and life choices. And since our formative years informs our view of the world and the making of our inner world, till we reflect and look back as to what informed us and our choices, our unconscious will keep making our choices for us. And as Carl Jung had said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will keep calling it fate. So let's try and reflect on what informed and formed the trajectory of our choices and our lives, because our lives, as we've seen, also impact the lives of others. Let's try and see if we need to bring about any changes there and do an inventory of the same. Let's do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share and subscribe.